so we can start. Okay, so I've been fielding things. I'm sending you emails. I post these things right after, so you will find the video, and I'm trying to give them titles on YouTube. You will also find old YouTube videos I did in 2019. For those of you who want to jump ahead, that's totally fine. You see that I don't get super hot on deadlines. Mostly what I want is to teach you something. So that's why I do a lot of individual one-on-one trying to correct your homeworks. And that really, I think, is most useful. Some people think I should be more strict because there's opportunities for sharing your answers. But my feeling is, I think that this is very valuable class and you could use it at any part of your life. So I don't get too carried away about it. So today I'm going to also rearrange the lectures just a bit because, So today we're going to do the economics review because I have to go get my teeth looked at, which, just let me tell you, trying to schedule a cleaning with the dentist has taken me 9 months, and I'm just about ready to fall over from the amount of paperwork. So some things are not like they used to be. All I have to say about that. So let me pull up this review. Okay, there's my PowerPoint I want to share. So here is our PowerPoint for the day. And so this is basically an economics review. I am, in fact, an applied economist. I have a degree in business, bachelor's degree in business. I have a master's in applied economics from Montana State. I was the first woman out of that program many years ago. And I got my PhD in agricultural and resource economics because back in the day, those were applied rather than straight theoretical economics, even though I had to take classes in theoretical economics and pass all-day written exams in theoretical economics. But I'm very practical, so I stuck with the applied stuff, which back in the day was agriculture and then resource management. So that's really where we're coming from with this. So if I offend any of the economists in the room by being too simple, as I sometimes am, to make it clear, and the accountants in the room, because I will say things that I don't mean to be insulting, but I'm trying to make it as simple and as friendly as possible. I think that's what we have to do. We have to understand what we're talking about. We'll never get agreement on values. You see how heated up all this is? So we really need to be patient, communicate, put it forth as simply as possible. So let's remember now where we ended on this economics note before. We have these resources that we use to increase our well-being. And we can either save our resources, save your money, or spend your money now. Same thing with resources. And again, resources are anything we use to increase our well-being. So it's not really the resource you're interested in, you're really interested in that well-being. So you see now, again, if we were sustainable, then the future and the present well-being would be equal because we really don't want to sacrifice the well-being of people today for the benefit of people tomorrow, nor do we want to sacrifice the well-being of the people in the future for the well-being of the people today. This is very difficult to do, and we're going to talk more about it from an economics point of view, because that is one of our perspectives. It's very important that we understand and love our economists, because they're very important people, and they know a lot of good stuff. So we have this idea that, oh, let me get to that view. It's better, it's a bigger view. No, slide view, come on, you. Okay, so again, the question is, are we going to use it now? And once we decide to use it now, then we can produce market or non-market goods and services. We want to talk today a lot about markets because, as I said, economists are real hot on them. And so we're going to delve more into that. So we're going to talk a lot about markets and how they allocate goods and services. And I want to be very, very clear here. The reality is, in our world, humans have unlimited wants. We want everything, and we have limited resources. So we just cannot get everything we want. That's life in the lane. So we have to have some way to allocate things. So who's going to get what? So the main economic questions: what are we going to produce? How are we going to produce it, and for whom? All of our researchers are sitting there, and all of us have that are in the situation have got to say, what are we going to produce? How are we going to produce it, and for whom? So markets are very efficient mechanisms for making these decisions. This is why we love them. So we're going to talk about why they're efficient. And again, no matter how you shake it, we have to have an allocation mechanism. I have a game that I play with young students, like grade schoolers, even in my college classes, trying to get them to see that we all cannot have everything we want. Choices have got to be made. And so we have allocation mechanisms to figure out who gets what and how much they get. Now, it is never going to be fair. This is life. Let's accept that. So I think that's another thing in today's world we need to understand. Can't have everything. Trade-offs must occur. And that's what we're talking about with CBA, is actually trying to look at those trade-offs and discuss what we're willing to accept and what we're not. Okay, well, that doesn't work. All right. So anyway, what we're really assuming here is that in CBA, then we're looking at the benefits of picking this option and the costs of picking this option, and we're going to net them out. And we're going to assume, us economists, that we're all rational. How do we feel about that one? Is it just me that's willing to admit she's not rational sometimes? But economists assume we're rational. And what that means is that we're all trying to maximize our net benefits from our personal point of view. So whenever you think someone is doing something that seems really, really silly, look at it again. Because somehow they're evaluating the costs and benefits and deciding to do whatever it is, because in their mind, they get the most net benefits from doing that. You may not think so, but they do. That's why I'm saying telling people what to do doesn't really work. We really must look at what benefits are they perceiving, what costs are they perceiving, and if we don't think they're making a good choice, maybe we should spend more time actually looking at changing the structure of the way they perceive those costs and benefits, rather than be telling them what to do. Just saying, much easier. So let's assume we're rational and we're all going to maximize our net benefits. I'm not saying money, I'm saying net benefits. Oh, this thing doesn't work. Okay. Why am I saying net benefits? Because sometimes you have to give up something in a non-monetary sense. You're going to do something, there may be a price to it, but there also may be some sort of other sacrifice that you have to make. For example, I sometimes get in my mind that that's what I want, and I get out there and I'm like, no, that didn't work at all, or I don't understand it. Or for example, I'm very afraid of gas engines. So when I buy a lawnmower, it's not a gas one, plus I'm into the environment. So that may not be a monetary sacrifice for me to learn how to use that new lawnmower that I have to plug in and drag around my cord, and everybody thinks I'm crazy. But for me, that sacrifice is worth it. So again, it's not all about money for economists, so you needn't think that way. Economists, in fact, worry about things which we call opportunity costs. And that makes us very unique, because we really look at getting this decision up to some of the best options we want to consider. Remember when I talked about benefit cost analysis, I said we want to really identify some options that we're willing to consider to improve the situation. So once we get to those options, then you can simply say, well, if I do this one, I don't get that one. And if I do this one, I don't get that one. So one of the costs of picking this one is giving up that one, because you can't have it all. Remember what I said? It's all about trade-offs. So you've got to actually get down to some specific options so that you can identify the opportunities that you're giving up and actually try to dial that in to your benefit cost analysis. That's what makes economists unique. we think opportunity costs matter. So this is very important to us and we account for it. Accountants, on the other hand, though we love them, they do not consider opportunity costs. They're just focusing more on out-of-pocket or money costs, which are also important. And they spend inordinate amounts of time figuring out when they've actually paid for something. You pay in advance for your car insurance. When did you actually pay for this month's insurance? So they spend a lot of time really trying to nail down those monetary costs, exactly when they are actually costs. Because you could cancel that insurance policy after you paid your 6 months premium and you would get a rebate. So some of that was not actually a cost because that month has not expired yet. So accountants spend a lot of times worrying about that. And they also spend a lot of times worrying about how to value things, which we're not really going to talk about right now. But economists do things differently. So this is one of the things that will kind of be a sticking point for some people who are not understanding of accounting and economics and think, what's the difference? Economists actually think about things that you didn't really spend money on, but the things you gave up, which is important. Because if you gave it up, guess what? You can't have it. So we got to figure out how you're going to feel about that and how everyone else is going to feel about that. So here we go now. We're going to launch into markets, and I'm going to give you a simplified explanation of how they work. And those of you who had economics will see that this is very simple on my part. And there's a reason for that, because I don't want to get it too complex. It gets a bit tedious for the non-economists. So first thing I want you to really get is this all starts with a consumer. Everybody tries to make the business the bad person, but if we didn't buy it, it would go away. So all these businesses are looking at all these consumers, trying to figure out what they're willing and able to buy. And through time, we've discovered that as the price goes up, you tend to buy less. Doesn't seem that complicated, but for economists, it's a law. If the price goes up, as things get more expensive, you tend to buy less of them. Seems reasonable. And when we put this on a graph, this is what the graph looks like. Here's what the consumers are willing and able to pay for each amount they're willing and able to buy. So if you say the price is here at P1, I'm assuming you can see my pointer, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. I got paranoid after yesterday. Okay, so if the price is P1, then everybody who is willing and able to buy this thing is represented here. And at this price, this much is going to sell. We don't really know exactly what consumers are going to be the ones that actually are going to buy it at that price, but we just know they're willing and able to do it. And the people at this end, or the amounts at this end, because it may not be people, just maybe it's the same person, but I just buy less. On this end, they're willing, no, not willing. They're not willing to pay that much for it. It has no value that's worth P1 to them, or they would buy it. And this person up here really values it at a price that's much higher than P1. So we're really reflecting our values in a demand curve. I'm basically saying, I really value this and I'm up here, or I don't value it so much and I'm down here. Does that make sense? And of course, economists spend a lot of time trying to estimate these things. They're very hard to estimate. We change our minds all the time. One day I may be this way, the next day that way. When I'm in an airport, I'm willing to pay a lot for a cup of coffee. But when I'm not at an airport, I make all my coffee at home. That's just me. So different people, different things. So there we are. That's your demand curve. And how do we get price? Well, we need to then bring in our businesses, because they are going to decide whether or not they want to produce goods and services that we are willing and able to pay for. And that's their decision. So they also have curves. Those are called supply curves. And the law of supply says that as the price goes up, I'm willing to supply more. If you pay me more, sold. I'm ready to supply more. So that curve goes upward to the right. And those are the two curves that you use to determine what will actually happen in the market. You get together the consumers, the customers, the suppliers, the businesses, and you bring them together and they show up, and eventually they will come to agreement on who's going to pay what for what. Okay, so this is a supply curve, but you have to understand that supply curves are kind of special. They're not like demand curve. Demand curves are just the way a consumer feels, what they're willing to pay. The consumer is deciding what their values are. Each consumer may have a different set of values, but it's not something that I can technically discover. I can't go to you and get you to say, well, is this really, really important to you? Exactly how that works. Sometimes you will buy things. Maybe you don't do this, but sometimes I do. I buy something, you get it home, and you're like, why did I buy that? Is that really worth it? Some people buy things that are more expensive just to have that designer label. Some people want to buy knockoffs. They don't care that it's the designer quality, they just want that label. So we have all these funny little things that we do. But for suppliers, they're very geared to their opportunity costs. And that is, what do they have to give up to produce that good or service? So they actually say, for each one I produce, what did I actually give up as far as the cost of producing that one? And then I can make a decision to produce one more and one more. Okay? So that supply curve really represents, there we go. That supply curve really represents what that supplier or group of suppliers is giving up. So when you're right here, this one right here costs this much to produce. And this one right here costs this much to produce. So why do they become more and more expensive to produce? Because every time you want to produce more, you got to attract the resources from other uses. Say, hey, this is a great market. Come on over here. Come on over here and help me produce some of this stuff. And in order to attract them from somewhere else, you've got to pay them more because they're busy. Resources are not in sitting idle. We don't have enough to go around anyway. So they're just not sitting there. You've got to kind of attract them in. And so we have a situation where those opportunity costs are going up as you produce more, and you've got to pay them because these resources have other options. They could go do something else. So in order to attract them over here to let us use them, then we got to pay them more. So this is why these curves go up, while demand curves, on the other hand, go down. Why do demand curves go down? Why are these going down? The more and more you get of it, the less and less value it has. Have you ever sat down to eat ice cream or your favorite food? What happens after the first 2 or 3 bites? What bite is the best bite? The first couple. And then after that, the willingness to eat it and the great benefit it has for eating it goes down. So as you consume more, the value of one more bite goes down, where for the suppliers, as they produce more, the cost of each one goes up. So somehow we have to find some middle ground. And in the 1700s, Adam Smith came up with the invisible hand concept and really demonstrated that when you put these two together, you come up with this wonderful place where supply just equals demand. That's called equilibrium. So everybody who's willing and able to pay gets it. What about these people down here? No, it's too expensive. They don't get it. You think they're going to be happy about that? Not happy. But that's the way it goes. We didn't value it the way we needed for them to get it. In order for them to buy it, we have to value it less. But it's expensive, right? It's expensive to produce. So that just didn't happen. And what about these people up here? Or the suppliers that want to produce more? Are they happy? No, they're not happy either. Because they want to produce more and charge more, but no one's willing to pay. We only want this much at this price, and then we kind of stop. If we tend to go further, if we produce more, if we're out here, then the consumer values it at this price, but the supplier has to pay that much to get it produced. Would it make sense to produce that in our economy? Look, if we don't value that thing enough to pay the cost of producing it, I don't think we ought to be producing it. No. Not a good use of resources, not efficient. Same thing back here. If we had a price of this person would, of course, be willing and able to pay. What is my thingy keep? Okay. So if the price was up here, then what you would have is these people would be willing to pay this much, but we'd only have this much produced. So as these people made it obvious, wow, like this is really valuable. I value this so much and it's so cheap and I'm going to keep wanting more and more. And eventually those suppliers are going to pick up on that and they're going to start moving up this curve, raising their prices. And right here is where we'll end up. Same way here, if we had a situation where price was up here, these suppliers would get to the market and they would find, oh, they don't value it enough to cover my costs. So they're going to get out of the market. They're going to use those resources for other things, and they're going to slowly decrease production, which will bring that price down until we are right here again at equilibrium. Because as that price comes down, the people here then will enter the market. The people that weren't getting it, because if the price is up here, of course, you have a bunch of people here who are not being able to buy it. So as the price comes down, we'll move down this curve and we will be at our magic equilibrium. And this is what Adam Smith pointed out and called it the invisible hand. And folks, if it's a very competitive market where there's a lot of competition for resources and everybody can get in and out of that market reasonably and no one controls the market, there's a whole bunch of suppliers and a whole bunch of consumers that want to come together, you will have a very good market and you usually should end up here, which we call the competitive equilibrium. We love it. And why do we love it? Because the very last one right here was valued at just what it cost us to produce it. And everyone before that, all these before that, cost less to produce than the people in our society valued it. And we are all better off if we keep increasing production until this point. So we love the competitive equilibrium. This is what we're all striving for. And that's why we love it. And we have a lot of people in this market who actually got it for less than they valued it. But we also got a lot of suppliers who made more than they had to just to get them to produce that one good. So we have what we call consumer and producer surplus, people that got it at a value that was higher or lower than they needed to show up in the market to actually buy or sell. So we love competitive equilibrium because it's a very efficient point, because everyone except the last one is more valued by everyone in society than it cost us to produce it, assuming that these costs and values are all accurate. So there we have it, and we love it. And this is why we're so focused on markets, because it automatically creates order out of chaos. If you're in a communist system, which of course I love, who decides who's going to produce? The government. Does the government know what's going on? Do they know how much we should be producing and for whom? This is a very easy way to get communication to those suppliers so they know what to do and they will act accordingly. And if they mess up, they bear the burden. They bear the burden, not us. We don't have to tell them what to do. They just do it for us. Very effective thing, actually, to have businesses that help us out by producing what we value. So again, costs do not determine price. Price is really, really something that's, at the end of the day, demand driven. If you don't want to buy it, if you don't value it, don't buy it. What the supplier is responsible is how to produce it and how to get those resources and how to put them together. But we tend to paint ourselves as victims If I hear one more time, oh, we must shop at Walmart because it's the cheapest. No. You don't want to buy it, don't buy it. Don't blame Walmart. Go shop somewhere else if you don't like Walmart. It's your choice. So this is very important that we understand these concepts of efficiency, because that's what drives the economic point of view. We want to use our resources in their highest and best use. This is what makes our society best off. Don't be wasting things. How do we know if we're wasting it? Well, somehow we have to figure out its highest and best use. And demand curves help us do that. Very useful. Okay. Then we have the bane of the market, the market system. We have something called an externality. So sometimes we have costs that are not accounted for in the supply curve, or we have benefits that are not accounted for in the demand curve. And we call those spillovers. And I think we experience these every day in every way. Let me see, you're yakking on your cell phone on the bus. You're ruining my bus trip. I really am not willing to pay as much for a bus trip with someone yakking next to me. I guess that's an externality. Or you get up in the morning and you smell nice, clean air and you see a beautiful sunset. And you would love to see more of those. You would love to do whatever you could to smell nice, clean air, but society somehow is not able to actually buy and sell that. So you don't have a way to have a market for that, but yet you have a great interest in its benefit, but you don't have a way to buy it. No one can privatize it and sell it to you. So we have these cases where our demand curves and our supply curves do not account for the right costs or the right benefits because there's something interfering. And that's called an externality. Positive externalities are common, but we don't usually talk about them. The most common one that's referred to, and I'm only thinking of it because of our bee situation, bee pollinators. We love bees because they pollinate everything, right? So the farmer doesn't have to pay for the bees. They just fly around and pollinate things, but so they get benefits. But when the bees are sick, who's gonna bear those costs of fixing up those bees? Or I actually had a student once who used to tell me, oh, I walk across campus, I fall in love 6 times a day, I should pay more for going here. Perfect example of a positive externality. He literally said, I have so much fun walking across campus, I should actually pay more for this, it's so much fun. Parks, we love green stuff. We love to look at it. Can you charge for a view? Sometimes you can, but not always. So these are some of the things that are common. We don't usually worry about them, but we still have them exist. So in a positive externality, the situation you have is you have the private demand curve, which is what the market sees, but society would be better off if we would have more produced. So this is the value society gets if the resources are used to produce these goods or services. But because the supplier cannot privatize that and sell that, we end up here with the private demand and, in fact, the private supply. So we end up here and we're really underproducing this good or service because we get this much, but we really want this much. Society wants this much, but the private markets only supplied this much. So when we have those situations, it's the role of government to really examine if we should come in there and supply some of those things. This is why we have public schools. Because if you have all private schools, poor people will not be educated because they just don't have the money. But we value educated people, rich, poor, or whatever. So we give free public education because the private markets will not supply what we feel we need as a society. And we want to maximize our societal benefits if we're striving for sustainability. We don't just want to maximize the private ones when there's some positive externality. We really want more produced, and so we will have to assist in some way by coming up with a way to handle the cost of these additional expenses that the private suppliers have to bear to get us to this point here. This is where we want to be. So the government will enter in, or maybe they won't, but they should. That's their job, is to examine if this is important enough for us to enter in. Some externalities, maybe not such a big deal, like yakking on your cell phone. Maybe we're not going to impose yakking on your cell phone things, or maybe we will. It just depends on how we value these things. But for a positive externality, this is the situation, and the private market is not supplying what's optimal and most efficient for this society. So that's one case where a market doesn't do what its job. So the socially optimal is, again, QSPS, and we would be better off if we use our resources to produce that amount. But the private individuals will not be getting that because the suppliers cannot buy and sell it. They can't bottle it up. It's just a spillover thing. And this gets to be an issue. So that's something that we might interfere with if we were the government. The next possible option, and the one that we talk most about, I guess, is a negative externality. So the action of a producer decreases the benefits of another producer or a consumer. Generally, what do we call these? Pollution. Pollution, the yakking on the cell phone, that's noise pollution. Light pollution. A lot of stuff that irritates us nowadays, but we just don't say anything, we just bear the cost. But polluters impose additional costs on other members of society. And that curve looks like this. So your demand curve is here, and you have a separation between the cost to society of producing those goods and services and what producers are actually paying. A lot of pollution takes so long for us to realize, like my example about Agent Orange. Everybody who worked on Agent Orange and supplied their labor didn't realize it was going to kill them. They needed a job. This was the job. They didn't realize it was going to cause cancer. And I don't think that people in the war thought it was going to cause this havoc, and the people in Vietnam probably didn't think it was going to cause this havoc. But it's been a very large cost of the pollution associated with this chemical. Nuclear warfare. I mean, there's been tons of stuff through history. Let us go back to the Industrial Revolution, when in fact, earth in London was burnt so badly with chemicals that it was completely unproductive. And during the Olympics in London, they paved it over and made it the Olympic Village because that earth was so parched. Because we didn't realize the costs, the true costs of the Industrial Revolution in London and what they were doing. So this has happened through history and will continue to happen. And this is why we need to be very forward thinking about the risks associated with certain production and the pollution that can come with them. And so this is why we're so concerned then with environmental impact studies and cost benefit analysis relative to making decisions that affect cultural, social, and environmental resources. So these two things are situations which you may encounter in your CBAs, so you'll have to kind of figure out where these curves are, because you notice here, when we're doing valuation, we've got a price difference. And what is our basic problem here? We know where the supply curve is for businesses because we can estimate these things, right? But we really don't know what is the true cost to society, particularly with these long-term things that cause pollution. It may take 30, 40, 50 years for pollution to be discovered. And as I said before, when you have a high discount rate, that business is only looking forward maybe 20 years, not 70 years. Same with social stuff, all the negative social things we've done. Did we really think past this into the future, 100 years, 200 years, what this was going to do to the community? I don't think we did. So this is what we're discussing around the nation today, is the impact of some of those negative externalities that occurred because of things that we did years and years and years ago when we had no idea that the true cost to society was higher. And had we known that, maybe we wouldn't have done those things because those supply curves would have been placed differently. but we have no a priori knowledge, beforehand knowledge of where these curves are. And this is the thing that is probably our biggest problem. It's nice to say, let's fix it, but where exactly is that social supply curve? We don't really know, because who knows what's best for all of us to have that discussion. Discovery in a market where you have suppliers and consumers coming together, discovery isn't so difficult because they're all motivated. Consumers want to spend money, suppliers want to sell, they come to agreement. It's very quick. We see it on the internet. You see it with eBay, you know, all these bidding things. It's very easy to come to the market situation. But the non-market things are very hard to estimate. So that's where we are. Again, for negative externality, the social optimal is where the quantity for society and the price to society are determined by the intersection of the societal supply curve and the demand curve. And you really want to use less resources in that case than you would use in a private market. You want to be up here, not here. So you would use fewer resources. The problem is, it's hard to figure out where that social supply curve is. And if you just leave it with an unfettered market, this is going to happen. So there we are. Those are our two biggest problems, probably relative to this class with sustainability. We could also talk about monopolies where you basically, or monopsonies where you have one buyer or one seller. That is also a problem, but it's a little bit more complex, so I'm not going to get into that, and we don't deal with it too much in this class because most of this, again, is relative to sustainability, and a lot of it has to do with externalities. But it's also possible, and you see that we try not to have monopolies. That gives one person power and lets them control things. So monopolies and monopsonies we're not going to talk about, but that is another option where the government would get in there because the market is not efficient. So government policy to resolve these negative externalities and positive externalities as well, you either regulate or you tax. That's what you do. You either tax stuff. What do you tax? You basically implement a tax that's equal to this. As soon as you implement this tax, the private supply curve will shift to be equal to the social supply curve because you're putting a tax at every amount. So this thing shifts over just as much. And then we have a higher price, and that tax can go to either fixing the externality, finding how to work around it, cleaning it up, but you have some money. And who did we decide last time likes higher taxes? Nobody likes higher taxes. So this is our least favorite and our most effective. This is a problem. What most people like is regulation. Most people like regulation. Few people want taxes, but most people want regulation where we just mandate this is what we're going to do. So regulation would be, okay, we're here, we want to be here, so let's just pass a law that says this is where we have to be. That's nice, but it doesn't really work very effectively because at this price, we've got these people out here, right? If you put this over here, these suppliers could also be considered options of sources. But the problem is anybody above here is a high cost producer. It's not efficient. We want to deal with low cost producers. Those are our faves. We start there. We're not saying they're bad. We're just saying they're efficient, they're low cost. Let's go with those. But if you just say the price is going to be up here, then you're introduced another inefficiency because you're saying, oh, well, any of these suppliers, but we don't want this one. We really want it down here. So you have to control, and it's very hard to do. It's a fairness argument. We get really hung up about fairness. Sustainability arguments get very hung up on fairness. Fairness is difficult for economists. You notice what I said? Oh, the low-cost producers. Those are the most efficient. I try to stay away from a blanket statement about fairness because for economists, tough one. Tough one. You have to look
Professor, would you say then that taxation has more of an influence on changing the social behavior when it comes to like shifting how we view in value demands. Would you say that taxation would have more of an impact on that?
The reason I like taxation is that you're really taxing the offending good or service that's producing the pollution. If Hummers pollute, let's tax Hummers. Let's not tax hybrids, right? So rather than give people a break for buying a hybrid, let's just tax Hummers, and people will magically buy fewer of them. And we don't have to yell at them. We don't have to preach at them, right? Yep. And on top of it, we have more money for the government to go and pursue other good opportunities to do a better job of dealing with externalities. Does that make sense? So this is very important that you remember that what I'm saying is telling people what to do doesn't work. So if you tax things, you will give them an incentive to buy the thing that is a better option because it will now be cheaper. So they'll switch to that. Or if you're just dedicated to that Hummer, then I think you should pay more because you're causing a lot of pollution. And you should pay more because you're expensive for us and you better pay for it. I think it's fair in my world. The offenders should pay. Make them pay. If you're doing stuff that's polluting, pay for it. And then we have money to clean up after you, or a way to figure out how to reduce that pollution, you know, from the product or service. So while I know people hate more taxes, they're very useful in getting us to behave in certain ways without shouting orders of us. And if it's just so important for me to buy that Hummer, I can pay more and make other sacrifices in my life because I now have less income for other things, and I'll adjust somewhere else. And then I am not running around complaining about being coerced and being forced to do things. No one's forcing me to buy that Hummer. It's just more expensive. I think it's reasonable. The problem is people just don't like that kind of stuff. Okay, because suppliers that aren't selling stuff, they want to have higher prices and they want the government to mandate that. Consumers that can't buy the things they want the government to give them lower prices. What I'm suggesting is we need to learn how to deal with our choices.
I mean, sorry if I'm tangenting off I'm just thinking here. Would that then support different classes then, the classes in society? Because then it's almost like creating a system where if you can afford to pollute, then you can pollute. But then what about the people in poverty that don't have the ability to want to maybe participate in that lifestyle and want those things but can't afford it? So then it still creates that separation of classes, right?
No, it does not. And let me give you the class example of what happens. In Europe in the 50s, they decided they didn't have natural gas resources. So they had very high gas taxes, and they still have very high gas taxes. But what did they do for the poor people who then, they also didn't want all these cars. Like we have narrow streets, we've got all these old narrow. So what did they do? They taxed the heck out of gas for years and years and years. What did they do with that tax dollar? They built very, very good public transportation systems for the people that were not wealthy. So if you go to Europe, the people that have a lower socioeconomic status did not suffer because of the high gas tax. They actually now have, and they also give them, you know, like free tickets. The old people get free bus passes. Students get free. I mean, you go to Europe and it's got really great public transportation. What happened in the US? We are wedded to those cars. Gotta have those cars. All these highway miles. No good trains. So even if we want public transportation, we don't have the money to fix it up now. But if we'd have done what Europe did, and since 1950 poured money into better public transportation, then we could be in the same boat as they are. Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of forward thinking and understanding what to do with those tax dollars that you generate, because you have to understand that you have a group on the low end of that demand curve that simply can't afford it. So my suggestion is that you take those tax dollars and try to address that particular social problem. And we see what happened with some of these pandemic tax breaks. Did they go to the rich or did they go to the poor?
To the rich.
I'm resting my case on why we need political science, and let's figure out how to solve that end of the problem. Because I'm an economist, I'm not a politician. So why politicians come out and do these things, I don't get it. But that's really the purpose of the benefit cost analysis, is let the politicians understand the impact of some of the stuff they're doing. Because who's going to be banging on their door? Suppliers, probably, right? Because they're interested. They're going to make money. So they're going to be mostly greeted by businesses with their stories. Do you think the little poor grandma in Ohio is going to run over there and tell them what raising the gas price is going to do to her? I don't think so. But that's a political problem. That's why we need CBA to put it forth to them, to understand how all the stakeholders in the community are affected. Because the basic economics is not wrong. The issue is, once you get the tax dollar, how do you deal with some of the negatives associated with taxes and the people at the bottom end of that demand curve? That's a whole nother discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the purpose of the government is for, is to handle those situations where you have a socioeconomic class that just cannot ever end up in a market coming out with certain things. Like, of course, for economists, we don't say you have to have things, but we do try to understand that we do need basic things. But look at us with healthcare. We did the same thing there. I mean, you go to Europe, they have public healthcare. Over here, we're still arguing about this. I don't know, it's a thing. But that's not necessarily the market that does that. That's a lack of understanding of externalities and how to manage those externalities. We want to correct them. We don't want to make them worse. We don't want to make a situation worse. What we're trying to do is correct things. So we have correcting taxes. And we even have correcting subsidies, right? Food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid. We are correcting things because we have those people at the bottom that can't pay. So we take government money we collect from taxes and we try to correct their issue in a non-market way. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you.
But you have to think about it like this.
Right, yeah.
And you see how clearly I've laid it out, but people get very emotional about these things. Oh, I gotta go. Okay, so we got regulation as command and control, and we don't really like it. We prefer taxes. So we come together, we exchange property rights, and we decide that equilibrium is good. And if we're not at a competitive equilibrium because of an externality, then we try to do corrective adjustments. That's what we're trying to achieve. And again, for an economist, we're about efficiency. Now, equity, as in social equity, is not something that economists spend tons of time on because you have to have what's fair. That's difficult for us to talk about, but we do understand the idea of correcting situations where you have a certain group that's always on the bottom of that demand curve. So we get that, but we don't necessarily get into as prescriptive or normative type, this is what you should do. We just say, well, if you do that, you're going to have a bigger group at the bottom and you've got to deal with that. Does that make sense? Okay, we're done. And unfortunately I have to go. So I'm going to post this thing. I'm going to stop the recording.